Hey friends, tonight we're going back, way back, to a place of drafty halls, cold stone walls, and daily chores that could quite literally kill you. Welcome to the medieval castle, not the fairy tale one. This isn't knights and feasts and royal banquets. This is mouldy straw, unwashed laundry, and chamber pots with commitment issues. A world where surviving a Tuesday was harder than most fantasy wars. So, before you tuck yourself in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, only if this strange little corner of sleepy history is your thing. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What time is it for you? I love seeing where this weird little community stretches across the globe. Now, pull up your blanket, dim the lights, and let's suffer through a medieval day together, quietly. You wake up in the weapons room. Not your room, not a room. Just the place where cold steel lives and the warmth of human dreams goes to die. There's no pillow, unless you count a folded cloak that smells like boiled leather and old onions. No mattress, unless you're particularly fond of damp straw, creaky floorboards, and the occasional mouse using your shoulder as a stepping stone. Your back hurts, that's normal. Your neck hurts, also normal. Your dreams were interrupted around 3 a.m. by the sound of a halberd tipping over. Again. You sit up. Your breath fogs in the air. It's so cold, you briefly wonder if you died in your sleep and woke up in purgatory with rats and rusted armor. But no, you're alive. You know this because your left foot is already wet, courtesy of a leak in the ceiling that no one ever fixes because it's not raining that hard. Next to you, someone else groans awake. He's wrapped in an old banner that used to hang in the dining hall before a goose threw up on it. Resourcefulness is key when your lord believes blankets are luxury items. The smell in the room is a combination of sweat, wet iron, and that mysterious scent of something died here a month ago and we've just accepted it. You glance around. Above your head hangs a sword with a crack through the blade. Next to your hip, a shield that smells suspiciously like cheese. Behind your spine, a helmet someone used as a night pot and forgot to empty. You don't scream. You're used to it. A rat scurries across your leg. Bold. This one's been here for months. You've named him Sir Squeaks-a-lot. You're not friends, but there's an understanding. He doesn't bite you. You don't eat him. Yet, your tunic is stiff with yesterday's sweat and dried porridge. You slept in it because you only have one. Laundry day is when it rains hard enough to run with a bucket. Your breath still fogs. It's colder inside than outside. Because castles weren't built for comfort. They were built for defense, draftiness, and the echoing sound of your misery bouncing off damp stone. You try to stretch. Your back cracks like firewood. Your knees pop like bad bread. But hey, no plague sores this morning. That's a win. You reach for your boots. They're not yours. You wear them anyway. They're too small. One's missing the sole. One has a hole so large you can wave at your toes. Still better than going barefoot on stone floors, colder than the affection of your noble employers. You sigh. The day hasn't even started, and you already want it to end. But you stand, because in this castle, sleep is a luxury, and not dying before breakfast is the closest thing you get to a promotion. And so begins your medieval morning. Wrapped in rags, half frozen, mildly rat-adjacent, and about to risk your life walking across a floor where someone once slipped and landed on a spear rack. The sun isn't up yet, but you are. Congratulations. You've survived the night. Let's see if you survive the garderobe. You shuffle down the corridor like a half-awake ghost wrapped in wool. Your boots squelch on the cold stone. You're not heading to breakfast. You're heading to the garderobe, which is a fancy medieval word for hole in the wall where dignity goes to die. There's no door. Just a narrow alcove at the edge of the outer wall, high above the moat. The wind howls through it like it's trying to scrape your soul clean before you sit. This is your toilet. A literal opening carved into stone, suspended over open air. A vertical invitation to disaster. You sit very carefully, or hover, if you're smart. The seat is a slab of cold stone worn smooth by generations of equally miserable backsides. There's no privacy, no toilet paper. Just a draft so strong it might whistle a tune through your ribs. Down below, the moat. Or what used to be a moat. Now it's mostly mud, bones, food scraps, and the offerings of every castle occupant for the past 10 years. You try not to look down. You try not to breathe. You try not to die. Because here's the thing. People have fallen. It doesn't happen often, but it happens just enough that you always keep at least one hand on the wall and say a quick prayer to Saint, "Don't let me slip while squatting." There's no light in here, just a tiny slit that lets in fog and the scent of 10,000 regrettable meals. Sometimes, when the wind shifts wrong, it doesn't blow out, it blows in. Which means everything you hoped would leave now greets you in full aromatic return. Congratulations, you've just been slapped by your own past. And let's not forget the rats. They live in the moat. They climb. Some are curious. Some are bold. Some have no respect for personal space. You finish quickly, or at least try to. But there's always that one moment when you stand up and feel the stone shift slightly beneath your feet, and you question all your life choices. There's no soap, no sink, just a damp cloth hanging nearby that you suspect has never been washed, and may in fact be cursed. You wipe your hands on your tunic and pretend that makes it better. It doesn't. You step back into the corridor, a little colder, a little humbler, and a lot more aware of your own mortality. And now it's time to carry water, because apparently, in this castle, gravity only works one way. Let's go upstairs. With buckets. Your arms are still numb from the cold when someone barks your name. No, please, no, good morning, just your name, followed by bucket. Because today, like every day, it's your turn to fetch water. Not just any water, clean water, which in this castle means hiking down to the well in the courtyard, filling 2 heavy wooden buckets and hauling them back up 5 floors through a spiral staircase designed by someone who hated legs. The buckets are older than you. The handles bite into your palms. They leak just enough to make your shirt wet by the time you've taken 5 steps. You brace yourself, 1 deep breath, and up you go. The staircase is narrow, curved, and lit only by theoretical light. You can't see your feet. You can barely see your hands. The steps are stone, uneven, slick with moss, and always cold. You count them, not to keep track, just to distract yourself from the burning in your shoulders and the fear that one slip means you'll fall and be remembered forever as the one who flooded the stairs with his own skull. Every few steps you pause, not because you're lazy, but because you want to survive. The buckets slosh, your arms tremble. Someone behind you shouts, "Hurry!" Because of course they do. They're not carrying anything. You pass the kitchen level, then the servant quarters, then the main hall. And just when you think you're done, someone remembers the chapel needs water too. Because apparently, God doesn't carry his own. By the time you reach the top floor, your spine feels like it's made of damp breadsticks. You set the buckets down, hands raw and shaking, and hear, "Too slow. No thank you. No break. Just, again." You want to cry, but you're too dehydrated. You want to quit, but that's not an option. In this castle, water doesn't flow. People do. Up and down and up again. And here's the cruel irony. You can't even drink this water. Not until it's boiled, blessed, and fought over. You might get a ladleful, if the cook's in a good mood. But right now, there's no time to drink, because you smell smoke. Which means it's time to go underground. The kitchen fires are waiting, and they don't light themselves. You descend into the kitchen. Not the bright, warm kitchen of fairy tales. This one is below ground, chiseled into damp stone, and smells like ash, grease, and 10 generations of regret. The walls sweat, the ceiling drips, the floor sticks. And the air? The air doesn't move. It hovers, thick with smoke from last night's fire, which never fully went out and is now sulking like a damp dog under the hearth. Your job? Start the fire again. Which sounds simple, until you realize the wood is wet, the flint is dull, and the chimney draws smoke like a dying man draws breath, slowly and with a whimper. You kneel by the hearth, your knees already sore from the stairs, and start arranging twigs, damp straw, a few cursed thoughts, and whatever patience you've got left. Sparks fly, then die. You blow gently, then desperately. Smoke hits your face like a slap from a ghost made of onions. Your eyes water. You cough. You blink. And for a second you forget your own name. But eventually, The flame catches. It always does. You've learned the rhythm. Blow, wait, whisper a prayer, curse the logs, blow again. Now comes the real fun. Cooking. You haul a cast iron pot the size of your torso onto the fire. It's still greasy from yesterday, maybe last week. No one washed it. No one ever does. Inside, you dump yesterday's bread, some chopped leeks, half rotten, and a bone that may or may not be from a chicken. 6 mouths are already watching. You don't know how they got here so fast. They hover near the edges of the room like smoke in human form, waiting for breakfast, or something vaguely breakfast-shaped, to emerge. You stir. Your back screams. Your arms shake. The fire flickers. The pot hisses. Someone sneezes into the flour. No one cares. From upstairs, a voice yells, "Where's the soup?" You answer with silence, and stirring, and maybe a tear. There's no spice. There's no butter. There's just salt, when available, and smoke. Lots of smoke. Eventually, the soup is ladled into bowls. Some get more, some get less. You eat last, if anything's left. But you don't complain, because next comes the courtyard, and what's waiting out there makes the kitchen look like paradise. The courtyard awaits. And you? You're holding a shovel that's older than most of the bricks in this place. Because guess what job no one ever volunteers for? Shoveling the collective sins of the castle. The inner yard is where everything meets. Soldiers, horses, chickens, spoiled wine, and that one goat who hates everyone equally. The stones are slick with mystery. Some patches are mud, some are not. You stop trying to tell the difference. Your task is simple. Scoop and scrape until the ground looks less like a battlefield and more like something you can walk across without gagging. First stop, the stables. The horses have been busy. So has the guard who clearly missed the latrine again. You mutter something unholy and dig in. The smell hits first. A pungent mix of manure, sweat, and something that may once have been cheese. Your eyes water. Your soul recoils. You press on. You find things. Not just waste. Objects, relics, clues to last night's chaos. A cracked dagger, half a boot, a tooth. Not yours, possibly human. You don't ask questions. You don't want the answers. Across the yard, a knight relieves himself with the confidence of someone who's never once held a shovel. You lock eyes. He grins. You look away. The shovel gets heavier by the minute. Your arms ache. Your back rebels. Your stomach makes that warning noise again. You try to focus on a small, clean patch of stone. Your masterpiece. Your hope. Then a goose walks over it and does what geese do best. You exhale through your mouth. Bad idea. Now the taste is involved. Someone yells from a window. You missed a spot. You don't look up. You just scrape. You are invisible. Essential. Disrespected. Like a medieval sanitation angel with 0 wings and 2 very smelly buckets. Eventually, the pile is moved. The smell stays. Your dignity? Probably buried somewhere near the chicken coop. But the sun is rising higher now, and breakfast is digesting, which means it's almost time for another castle, wide offering to the garderobe gods. You wipe your hands on your tunic, again, and get ready for the next part of the day. Bread, beer, and the illusion of rest. You walk the halls alone now. The laughter is gone. The music, if you can call 2 drunk men shouting a ballad music, has faded. What's left is silence. And cold. Not the poetic kind. Not snowflake on the window pane cold. This is stone in your bones, breath invisible, joints locking 1 toe at a time kind of cold. The torches flicker, but they don't help. They burn low, casting shadows that move too slowly, like ghosts with arthritis. You wrap your cloak tighter. Not that it helps. It's wool. Or it used to be. Now it's more whole than thread, with the insulation value of a wet sock. The air smells like damp limestone, mould, and whatever's growing behind the tapestry that no one's dared touch in 20 years. Every step echoes. Not dramatically, just annoyingly, like your feet are tattling on you to the walls. And the walls? They drip. Yes, drip. Stone shouldn't drip, but this stone does. Because castles breathe, they say. Which is romantic code for, there's water coming from somewhere and it's not your concern. You pass the archery room. The ceiling there collapsed 3 winters ago. Still not fixed. Why? Because it's not urgent. Apparently, urgent things must kill at least 2 people before they get attention. You pause by a slit window. Nothing to see. Just fog. Even the moon refuses to visit. Somewhere, a rat scratches. Somewhere else, something bigger. You don't investigate. Curiosity is a luxury of people who don't have chores at dawn. You finally reach your sleeping area. It's not a room. It's an alcove. In the back of the weapons hall. You lay down on your straw. It's damp again. Your blanket smells like old cabbage and wet wool. You pull it close anyway. Because somehow, this is home. Not warm, not safe, but familiar. You stare at the ceiling. A drop of water lands on your nose. You don't flinch. You've adapted, like a mushroom. And just before sleep takes you, you whisper to yourself, "This castle is not like the songs. No glowing hearth, no friendly ghosts. Just cold, dark stone, and you. And if you're lucky, you'll wake up tomorrow. The bell rings. Not the gentle chime of morning prayer. This one clangs like it's angry at you personally. It echoes through the stone halls with the energy of someone kicking a church out of bed. This is the work bell. It means, stop chewing, stop sitting, stop pretending your back doesn't hurt. It means, move, now. You rise with the others. Nobody talks. There's nothing to say. You already know what the day holds. Armor to scrub, stone to sweep, hay to shake, things to carry, things to fix, and no thanks at the end. Your first job today? Polish chainmail? Chainmail is heavy, oily, sharp in all the wrong places. And somehow, despite being made of metal, it still manages to smell like feet. You set up on the floor. No cushion, no gloves, just rags, ash, and the creeping suspicion you were born into the wrong century. You rub each ring by hand, thousands of them. Your knuckles turn black. Your spine forgets what upright means. Nearby, someone is scrubbing the flagstones with vinegar and curses. Another servant is shaking out the hay from the stables, sneezing wildly as dust, fleas, and something suspiciously pink fly past. Upstairs, the nobles complain about a draft. Down here, you're soaked in sweat. From the effort, not the heat. The air is damp and heavy. The windows barely exist. And you've already hit your head twice on a beam so low even the rats duck. If you're lucky, you'll spend the afternoon cleaning chamber pots. If not, you'll be sent to rehang tapestries, a task that involves ladders, yelling, and a high chance of falling into a banquet table, again. And don't make mistakes. Forget one piece of armor? Miss one muddy footprint on the Lord's stair? That's a trip to the thinking corner, which sounds harmless, until you realize it's a storage room with no light, no food, and a rat who might be a ghost. So you work, you wipe, you haul. Not because you love it, not because you're strong, but because there are worse jobs, and because not working means not eating. And tomorrow, the bell will ring again. Same sound, same pain. But right now, you still have half a day to survive. And here comes the corridor, and footsteps, and velvet. You're about to meet a noble. Try not to breathe wrong. You hear them before you see them. The nobles. Their footsteps echo differently, slower, cleaner, somehow smug. Their cloaks swish like they're allergic to silence. Their boots click on the stone like punctuation marks made of money. You're in the hallway, arms full of firewood, knees aching, sweat glistening on your brow like shame. You think about ducking into a side passage. Too late. They turn the corner. Protocol kicks in. Step aside. Bow your head. Don't speak. Don't breathe too loud. And for heaven's sake, don't make eye contact. You stare at the floor. It's a familiar view. Old stone. A suspicious stain. One of your own shoelaces untied again. Your heart thumps. Not from fear exactly, just instinct. The instinct to survive an encounter where you could lose your job for smiling wrong. A silk robe brushes past you. Perfume follows, a cloying mix of lavender, rose water, and power. Someone laughs. It's not a kind laugh. The Lord speaks. Has this one been dusted? Your ears burn. He's talking about you, like you're a piece of furniture. You say nothing. That's the safest option. Always. One of them stops. A young lady, jewels at her throat, powdered face, eyes sharp like embroidery needles. She looks at you, or through you. Your spine folds another inch. She leans closer. You brace. But she just says, "His boots are mismatched," and walks away. You don't reply. You don't react. You file that comment somewhere between mild insult and compliment in disguise. Either way, you're still here, still standing, still not whipped. They disappear down the hall. The moment passes. You exhale finally, quietly, because even your breathing is subject to judgment. In this castle, you are not a person. You are a fixture, a soundless shadow, a body expected to move, carry, clean, and never be noticed. And yet, they always notice. If your clothes are stained, if your bow is too shallow, if your face forgets to look grateful, you pick up the firewood again. Back straight, eyes down, feet careful. Because the next stop is the banquet hall. And you, lucky you, have been assigned to the most glamorous job of the evening, cleaning vomit, while ducking flying chicken bones. Evening falls, which means feast. Not for you, of course. For them, the nobles, the knights, the ones who've never once held a mop but somehow managed to create messes that defy physics. You stand by the wall of the banquet hall, shoulders square, eyes lowered, trying not to breathe in too deeply, because the smell is complex. Spilled ale, roasting meat, wet fur, perfume, candle wax, and something very close to old socks. Your job? Everything. Pour the drinks, catch the plates, duck the bones. Hold back the curtain so the Lord's favourite cat can wander in and out at will. Keep the fire roaring, the floor dry, and the food flowing. And when someone vomits on the rushes, which they will, you're the clean-up crew. No warning, no apology, just a splash, a sigh, and a pointed finger. You move quickly, quietly, like a servant-shaped shadow. One hand holds a towel, the other steadies a tray. Your third hand, imaginary but necessary, wards off disaster. A knight throws a chicken leg over his shoulder. It hits you in the thigh. You nod, because apparently that counts as a compliment. A lady shrieks because the cat jumped onto the table. It's your fault. Somehow, you remove the cat. It bites you. You bleed silently. Someone asks for wine. You refill their goblet. They burp in your face. You smile. This continues for hours. There is no music, just the clatter of cutlery, the slosh of drink, and the chorus of nobles laughing at jokes that wouldn't amuse a donkey. Someone starts dancing. Someone else starts fighting. Someone throws up again. You mop. Again. By now, the candles have burned low. The air is thick. The floor is sticky. You've stepped in something that feels organic. You don't look down. And still, the party roars on. Because when you don't have to clean it up, excess is just fun. Eventually, someone passes out under the table. Another sings to a roast goose. The Lord claps his hands and declares the night civilized. You collect plates, shattered dignity, and what's left of your hearing. And then finally, you're dismissed. Not thanked, just waved away. You exit the hall, aching, stained, and wondering if anyone noticed the wine goblet stuck in your waistband. Tomorrow, they'll do it all again. But right now, you return to your quarters, where it's cold and damp, and somehow still better than the banquet hall. You walk the halls alone now. The laughter is gone. The music, if you can call two drunk men shouting a ballad music, has faded. What's left is silence. And cold. Not the poetic kind. Not snowflake on the window pane cold. This is stone in your bones, breath invisible, joints locking one toe at a time, kind of cold. The torches flicker, but they don't help. They burn low, casting shadows that move too slowly, like ghosts with arthritis. You wrap your cloak tighter. Not that it helps. It's wool, or it used to be. Now it's more whole than thread, with the insulation value of a wet sock. The air smells like damp limestone, mold, and whatever's growing behind the tapestry that no one's dared touch in 20 years. Every step echoes. Not dramatically, just annoyingly, like your feet are tattling on you to the walls. And the walls? They drip. Yes, drip. Stone shouldn't drip, but this stone does. Because castles breathe, they say. Which is romantic code for, there's water coming from somewhere and it's not your concern. You pass the archery room. The ceiling there collapsed 3 winters ago. Still not fixed. Why? Because it's not urgent. Apparently, urgent things must kill at least 2 people before they get attention. You pause by a slit window. Nothing to see. Just fog. Even the moon refuses to visit. Somewhere, a rat scratches. Somewhere else, something bigger. You don't investigate. Curiosity is a luxury of people who don't have chores at dawn. You finally reach your sleeping area. It's not a room. It's an alcove. In the back of the weapons hall. You lay down on your straw. It's damp again. Your blanket smells like old cabbage and wet wool. You pull it close anyway. Because somehow, this is home. Not warm, not safe, but familiar. You stare at the ceiling. A drop of water lands on your nose. You don't flinch. You've adapted, like a mushroom. And just before sleep takes you, you whisper to yourself, "This castle is not like the songs. No glowing hearth, no friendly ghosts. Just cold, dark stone, and you. And if you're lucky, you'll wake up tomorrow." They call it rest time, which is funny, really, because nothing about it feels restful. You've finished your work. No one's shouting. No one's throwing bones. The nobles are passed out or passed on. And you? You finally get an hour to yourself. So what do you do with it? You sew. Not because you're crafty, because your shirt has 3 holes, 1 sleeve, and enough loose threads to knit a new rat. You sit by a stub of candlelight, squinting through smoke and linen fibers, trying to stab a needle through wool that's stiffer than your back. The thread tangles. The needle breaks. You sigh. Somewhere nearby, someone is picking at their scalp. Not out of thoughtfulness, out of necessity. The lice are back. Well, technically, they never left. You grab your louse comb. Bone handle, worn teeth. Your most reliable companion. You start at the nape of your neck and pray you don't find anything wriggling. You do. Of course you do. Someone once said that if you sleep in straw and work in filth, you become immune to shame. That's not true. You just get really good at ignoring things crawling on your skin. Your blanket smells like damp sheep. Your tunic smells like you. Neither is flattering. You think about bathing? Not fondly, more like a wish, a whisper of a dream, like someone thinking about going to the moon. Nice in theory, impossible in practice. Because in this castle, you bathe only on holy days, royal visits, or if the fleas unionize and demand it. The last bath you had involved a wooden tub, 6 other people, and a bar of soap that may have been just a hardened lump of lard. You don't miss the tub. You do miss the feeling of water on skin, even if it was murky, even if it made you colder after. It was different, and in this life, different is the closest thing to luxury. You keep combing, keep stitching, keep scratching that spot behind your ear that probably wasn't itchy until you started thinking about it. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, someone snores, and your candle burns lower. This is your time off. Welcome to it. In a few minutes, someone will knock and say it's your turn to stoke the kitchen fire. But for now, you have 5 more breaths. Use them wisely. They say cleanliness is next to godliness. In the castle, it's more like next to impossible. Because here, bathing isn't a routine. It's an event. And like most events, it only happens when someone important is watching. A visiting bishop, a royal envoy, or, Once, when the Lord's mother claimed the whole place smelled like boiled cabbage and fear. And so, tonight's your lucky night. The word spreads like wildfire. We're bathing. You don't cheer. You don't smile. You look around, suspicious. Because bathing sounds good, until you remember how it actually works. Step 1. One wooden tub. Old. Cracked. Reinforced with rope and hope. It sits in the kitchen, where the fire keeps things slightly warmer than freezing. Step 2. Water. Boiled in iron pots over a smoky fire, then dumped in bucket by bucket. Still lukewarm by the time it touches your skin. Still better than nothing. Barely. Step 3. Everyone in. Not all at once, thankfully, but close. You take turns. If you're first, you're blessed. If you're last, you're bathing in the ghosts of everyone else's decisions. The soap? A lump of lie, fat, and regret. It burns slightly. That means it's working. Or maybe it's just eating your skin. Hard to tell. You scrub fast. Arms, legs, neck. Avoid eye contact. Avoid the floating things. Especially avoid the conversation. The water turns grey, then brown. Then you don't look anymore. You finish. Dry off with something that might have been a towel, or possibly an old curtain. And that's it. You're clean. Kind of. For about 20 minutes. Until you put your tunic back on, and it undoes everything. You step back into the hall, steaming slightly, with a false sense of accomplishment. You smell better, or at least less fatal. And for a moment, just one, you almost feel human again. But then someone hands you a mop. Someone else asks where the soup is. And a third person sneezes into your direction with impressive force. Congratulations. You are now recontaminated. But for those 20 sacred minutes, you were clean. And in this castle, that's the closest you'll ever get to heaven. You've made it. Through chores, shovels, soup, shouting, nobles, lice and lie. And now, finally, you can sleep. Not in a bed. You don't have one. You have a sack of straw stuffed into a burlap bag that used to hold grain. Now it holds dreams and fleas. You lie down slowly. Your bones creak like old floorboards. Your back protests. Your feet throb. Your skin still smells faintly of smoke, soap, and someone else's sweat from the shared bath. The room is dark. Not soft, cozy darkness, but castle dark. Thick, cold, absolute. Lit only by the dying breath of a candle someone forgot to snuff. You shift. The straw pokes. Something crunches underneath you. You choose not to investigate. Beside you, someone coughs. Not the polite kind, the deep, medieval kind. The one that echoes in the ribs and says, "I've got 3 winters left. Tops." On your other side, someone is snoring. It's rhythmic, almost musical, like a dying accordion. In the rafters, scratching. The rats are active tonight. You name this one, Sir Chewsalot. He's bold, he's loud. He's probably chewing on your spare tunic right now. The wind howls through the cracks in the stone. Not gentle, not poetic. It whistles, mocking you, reminding you that yes, your blanket is too short and your socks are damp again. You pull the coarse wool up to your chin. It itches. Everything itches. But you're too tired to care. You stare into the dark. There is no silence. Only the soundtrack of suffering. Muffled groans. Distant rats. A window rattling like it's haunted by unpaid taxes. You try to breathe through your nose. You regret it. Something still lingers from the garderobe, 2 floors up. And yet, this is peace. This is what counts. Because no one is yelling. No one is bleeding. No one is currently vomiting into a boot. You close your eyes. And just before sleep takes you, one last thought drifts through your brain. I survived. One more day. And in this castle, that's more than most can say. So, would you survive a day in a medieval castle? Let's review. You woke up next to a sword. Used a hole in the wall as a toilet. Carried water up 5 flights like a 2-legged mule. Cooked soup that smelled like smoke and sadness. Shoveled manure. Dodged nobles. Combed out lice. scrubbed armor, cleaned vomit, and bathed in communal stew, then curled up on a burlap sack while rats tap-danced in the rafters. And all of that was a normal day. No war, no siege, no plague. Just Wednesday. There were no breaks, no privacy, no heat, no softness. You worked because not working meant no food. You obeyed because not obeying meant the dungeon. And you endured because there was no other option. Romantic, isn't it? The castle life. But here's the thing. They did it. They laughed. They loved. They survived. And they built a world that we now tour on weekends and complain about the lack of Wi-Fi. So no, you probably wouldn't last a day. But maybe, just maybe, they couldn't last an hour in ours. And that's the magic of boring history for sleep. You get to visit, without the fleas. Now roll over, get cozy, and be grateful for plumbing. Good night. Before I ever set foot in the royal kitchen, I thought I'd landed the best job in the entire kingdom. Food, every day. Fancy food, served hot, smelling of rosemary, garlic, and roasted meat. No digging ditches, no swinging swords, no marching through mud in winter. Just me, a wooden spoon, and a front row seat to the king's dinner table. They didn't tell me the catch. You see, I wasn't there to cook, or even to serve. My job was to eat, but not like a guest. I was the food taster. The royal poison detector, a human shield in an apron. Every meal the king ate, I ate first. Just a bite, maybe two, and then I waited. If I lived, the king would eat. If I dropped dead foaming at the mouth, well, then at least His Majesty would know not to touch the venison. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? I thought so too, for about 5 minutes. The kitchen was no fairy tale either. It smelled like sweat, onions, smoke, and something you could never quite name. There were rats in the corners, and cooks who hadn't smiled in years. The only silverware I ever saw was in the king's hands. And every time I sat down to taste the first dish, my brain played games with me. Was that a bitter aftertaste? Did that mushroom feel funny? Is it just nerves? Or are my lips tingling? There were no doctors nearby, no magic antidotes. Just me, my gut, and the hope that nobody hated the king enough to lace the stew. Sometimes I think back to my first day. They handed me a plate of roasted duck with a glaze so perfect it looked painted on. I smiled, took a bite, and then stared at the wall for 10 full minutes, convinced I was going to die. Turned out, it was just a clove I bit too hard. Since then, I've eaten more royal meals than I can count. Every single one of them came with a question, is this my last supper? So yes, I eat well, but I don't sleep well. And no, it's not a job I'd recommend, unless of course you enjoy dinner with a side of dread. The thing about fear is, it's never new. It ages with civilization. And when it comes to fear of poison, no one's more paranoid than a man with a crown. Long before I was born, long before castles, kings, and servants wore anything resembling socks, there were rulers nervously poking at their plates. Egyptian pharaohs, Roman emperors, Chinese dynasties, all powerful, all terrified that their next bite might be their last. You'd think, with all that power, they'd be safe. But power doesn't make you untouchable. It just paints a bigger target on your back. Which is why, somewhere in the shadowy corridors of history, someone came up with a brilliant idea. Why not feed the food to someone else first? Enter the food taster. Not a nobleman, not a soldier, not someone of value usually. Just a body with taste buds and the misfortune of being close enough to be trusted, but distant enough to be disposable. The Greeks did it. The Romans made an art of it. There's even a name for the role in Latin, pregustator. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Until you realize the pregustator was often a slave. One whose entire job was to die, quietly, so someone more important didn't have to. And the Romans weren't subtle about it. Nero, that famously unhinged emperor, didn't just have tasters. He had multiple layers of them, tasting the ingredients, the cooked dish, even the wine, before it ever reached his lips. Can't blame him. He poisoned others often enough to know how easy it was. In ancient China, emperors took it a step further. Food wasn't just tasted, it was watched during preparation. Every ingredient inspected, every utensil recorded, and multiple officials standing by as silent witnesses. Still, they used tasters, just in case someone slipped powdered nightshade into the rice. Even the Bible makes a subtle nod to the role. Remember Nehemiah, cupbearer to the king of Persia? People forget, he wasn't just pouring drinks. He was the buffer between the king and poison. A trusted servant, a walking taste test. And as the centuries marched on, nothing really changed. In medieval courts across Europe, the tradition of food tasting became expected. A silent ritual before every meal. The king sits. The food is presented. A taster steps forward, dips a spoon, swallows and steps back. Wait, watch, swallow again, hope for the best. Now, not every kingdom formalized the role. In some places, the cook himself tasted every dish. In others, it fell to servants, guards, or even court physicians. I once heard a tale about a Hungarian lord who made his own wife taste his soup. Romantic, isn't it? But always, the logic was the same. Let someone else die first. And I suppose, on paper, it makes sense. Poison has always been the great equalizer. No matter how tall your throne, how heavy your crown, one grain of the wrong powder, and you're just another cold body on a stone floor. What fascinated me, once I got over the initial panic, was how long this job had survived. Thousands of years, countless kingdoms, and still, the method hadn't changed. Bite, wait, breathe, hope. You'd think by the time I was working in that castle kitchen, someone would have invented a better system. A silver fork that turns green if there's poison. A royal cat that sniffs dishes. A wizard, maybe, if the budget allowed. But no, there was only me. I sometimes imagined the invisible thread that connected me to every food taster who'd come before. Some Roman slave with a copper bowl of figs. A Chinese courtier with trembling hands and a bowl of noodles. A Renaissance butler swirling wine with half a prayer in his throat. All of us nameless, all of us hungry, but cautious. You learn strange things in this line of work. You start to read people more than ingredients. You memorize faces in the kitchen. Who looked nervous today? Who was unusually quiet? You even listen to gossip, not for fun, but because jealousy and politics are the best clues that something foul might end up in the roast duck. Eventually, you stop fearing the poison itself. It's the not knowing that gets to you, the silent possibilities with every plate, because the worst thing about dying from poison is that you won't know which bite did it, and so you chew slowly. You breathe deeply. You smile politely. People often ask me, though not often enough to make me feel famous, how I ended up in this job. Was it something I trained for? Was I chosen for my bravery, my loyalty, my exceptional taste buds? I wish. The truth is, no one wants this job. Not really, and no one earns it either. You just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and not important enough for anyone to protect. That's how I got it. I was a kitchen boy, quiet, reliable. I didn't steal scraps. I showed up on time. One day, the old taster got sick. No one asked why, and I was asked to stand in. Just today, they said. That was 3 years ago. But I'm not special. If you look back through history, the people chosen to be royal tasters almost always fit the same general pattern. Close enough to be trusted, distant enough to be expendable. In Roman times, as I mentioned before, many tasters were slaves, bought or raised specifically for the role. Some were even trained from childhood to recognize bitter compounds or symptoms of poisoning. Imagine that, being praised at age 6 for identifying arsenic in a fig. In some Eastern courts, tasters were eunuchs, men who'd already been trimmed down by society, seen as less threatening, more obedient. Their lives were bound to the emperor. If he died, they often followed, literally. In the Middle Ages, though, it got more complicated. Monarchs became more paranoid. The nobility had layers of hierarchy, alliances, betrayals. So the food taster wasn't always the lowliest servant. It was often someone with enough status to look good at court, but not enough to be missed. Court physicians, for example, they knew herbs. They had steady hands. They could be blamed if things went wrong. Perfect candidates. I once heard of a French king who made his own doctor taste every single dish, every single day. The man lived to 70, though he couldn't digest anything but boiled cabbage by the end. Then there were guards, Soldiers with sharp eyes and dull sense of smell. Kitchen staff. Disgraced nobles hoping to earn back favour. Illegitimate royal cousins. Widows of treasonous barons. Anyone whose death wouldn't cause too many ripples. And of course, there were the favourites. Those are the trickiest, because sometimes the food taster was beloved, a childhood friend, a loyal companion, a cousin twice removed. Someone the monarch trusted most. And what better way to prove loyalty than to die for your ruler's lunch? It sounds noble, almost romantic, but if you ask me, that's just cruelty with good manners. In my case, no one wrote down my name in a gilded book. There was no ceremony, no knighted fork. I was just nearby, and I didn't ask questions, because here's the thing. Once you've been picked, you don't decline, you don't make excuses. You don't say, "But I have weak digestion." You smile, you bow, you take the spoon, and from that moment, you become invisible in the most dangerous way. Present, but silent. Essential, but forgotten. I've shared breakfast with kings, lunch with visiting nobles, dinner with bishops. I've tasted honey-roasted pheasant, candied almonds, glazed fish caught hours ago, and drenched in sauces I still can't name. I've eaten better than half the kingdom, but always alone, always first, always with that quiet question in the back of my skull. Who cooked this? Who ordered it? Who wants someone dead today? Some kings reward their tasters. Gold. Land. Wine. I've heard stories, but more often, it's just a warm nod of acknowledgement, or nothing at all. The real reward is living to taste again tomorrow. There were days I thought about stepping back, leaving, running off into the forest to live as a miller or a stable boy. But you don't retire from this job. You're either promoted, highly unlikely, or replaced, permanently. And the worst part? No one notices when you're gone. They just ladle the stew again. Sometimes I wonder who'll come after me. Will it be that quiet boy who sweeps the pantry? The scullery maid, who always stares too long at the bread? The cook's assistant with burnt fingers and better instincts than I ever had? Whoever it is, I hope they choose slowly, and I hope the king is in a good mood that day. Because here's the truth they never put in songs or books. The food taster is the closest person to the king at every meal, and the most alone. We're the bite before the feast, the silence before the toast, the shadow just behind the throne. And if you're lucky, you get to go back to your cot at night with a full belly and an empty grave. Lucky. That's the whole job description, really. People think it's simple. You take a bite, nod politely, and move along. As if tasting royal food is like being a medieval food critic with a bib and a fancy feathered hat. It's not. It's slow. It's delicate. It's tense in all the quiet, invisible ways fear creeps into your body without asking permission. There is a ritual to it. Not one written down in scrolls or carved into stone, but passed along in glances and muttered warnings from those who came before. Unofficial wisdom, polished over time like the bottom of a wooden spoon. Let me walk you through it. One meal, one shift between life and death. Step 1. Presentation. You're summoned to the hall or kitchen, or, in rare cases, to the king's personal quarters. The food is already plated. Covered, sometimes, with silver lids that glisten in candlelight. It looks beautiful, steaming, aromatic, tempting. That's the problem. No one ever poisons bad food. Poison always hides inside beauty. So you stand there, hands clean, mouth dry, heart quiet. You wait for the nod from the steward, the head cook, or sometimes the king himself. That little flick of the chin that means, go ahead, risk it. Step 2. Observation. Before I eat, I look. Always. How's the surface of the sauce? Any strange bubbles? Is the meat sliced differently than usual? Does the cup smell faintly metallic? I learned this the hard way, after an undercooked trout nearly sent me to the floor shaking. Not poison, just bad fish. But that's the thing. The body doesn't care. It panics all the same. You check the color, the temperature, the cook's expression, the kitchen's mood, even the guard's posture in the corner. If someone looks too calm or too interested, something's wrong. Your eyes are your first weapon, not your tongue. Step 3. The bite. This is the part everyone imagines. me with a small spoon or piece of bread, gently dipping into the meal like a sommelier of doom. And yes, it's usually just a bite. Sometimes a sip, enough to catch the flavor, enough to let your body absorb the risk. Too much, and you won't have time to call for help. Too little, and you might miss a slow-working poison. You chew slowly. You don't swallow immediately. You let it sit on the tongue, almost like it's confessing its secrets. You taste for bitterness, always bitterness. Most deadly things in nature come bitter. But here's the trick. You can't make a face, not even a flinch, because if the king sees hesitation, he might refuse the meal entirely. And someone, somewhere, will blame you. So you chew, calmly, you swallow, and then comes the worst part. Step 4. The wait. This is where time goes soft. You step back, bow slightly, and you wait. 1 minute, 2, 5. Long enough for any fast-acting poisons to do their work. Long enough to second-guess every twinge in your stomach, every heat in your chest, every shadow flickering on the walls. Your heart pounds so loud, you're surprised no one else hears it. You grip your hands behind your back to keep them from trembling. You look straight ahead, eyes unfocused, pretending not to listen to your own breathing. The king usually waits too, by the way. He watches you like you're a weather vane. No sudden movements, no sweating, no clutching your throat. If you stay upright and composed, the king eats. If you fall, well, the king probably doesn't, unless he's very hungry. Step 5. The signal. There's no trumpet, no applause. Just a glance, a nod, maybe a small exhale from someone nearby. Sometimes the steward steps forward and lifts the lid off the next dish. And just like that, the tension resets. For the soup, for the main course, for the wine. Each one must be tasted. Each one carries its own risk. Wine, by the way, is particularly tricky. It masks bitter flavors better than food, and some poisons dissolve into it, like salt into broth. You swirl, you sniff, you sip like you're toasting death himself. Step 6. Exit quietly. Once everything has been tasted, and the king begins to eat, you're dismissed. No fanfare, no thank you, just a hand wave, or sometimes nothing at all. You step away with a calm face, but your body is buzzing. That quiet high of having survived again. That brief moment when food returns to being food and not a gamble. But even then, the work isn't done, because poison doesn't always act fast. Some take hours, some wait in your belly, growing like a seed planted in fear. That's why after dinner, I never lie down right away. I sit, I drink water, I breathe, and I wait. People romanticize the job. I've had young boys in the kitchen say things like, "Must be nice to taste the royal food." I nod. I let them believe that. They don't know that tasting isn't the hard part. It's waiting to feel nothing that wears you down. No pain? Good. No dizziness? Even better. No reason to clutch the edge of the table and scream? Then congratulations, you live to eat another day. So no, it's not just a bite. It's a dance with the unknown, a test of nerves, a ritual older than the walls that hold this hall together. And if you're lucky, very lucky, you learn to chew without thinking about what could be killing you. Because in this job, confidence is as important as caution. You have to look calm, even when your stomach says otherwise. And if you're wondering whether I've ever felt something go wrong, let me tell you about the pigeon pie incident. But that's another course altogether. I never used to think about poison, not until I had to. Back when I was still peeling onions in the corner, I thought death came with swords, or arrows, or angry mobs yelling in muddy courtyards. But no, death, when it really wanted to be efficient, dressed itself in gravy and hid in the salt bowl. It only takes a few stories to change the way a king eats. And those stories, they're not just rumors, they're why my job exists. Let's start with the Romans. They practically wrote the poisoner's handbook. There was Lucius Calpurnius Piso, a Roman noble, allegedly poisoned by a rival over a bowl of figs. Not exactly the grandest way to go, death by fruit, but it made enough noise that emperors after him grew twitchy around their fruit baskets. Then there's Claudius, yes. That Claudius, the stuttering emperor who somehow survived politics long enough to become ruler. He didn't survive dinner. Legend says his wife Agrippina slipped poisoned mushrooms into his plate. He died painfully and publicly, and she placed her own son, Nero, on the throne. So what did Nero do when he became emperor? He hired multiple food tasters. Can't say I blame him. Jump ahead a few centuries and land in Byzantium, where the court was full of silks, secrets, and substances you didn't want in your wine. Emperor Leo V? Rumors swirled that his cupbearer made a mistake, and Leo never woke up. Of course, officially it was heart failure. It usually is. Then there's Ivan the Terrible. He had an entire department of people responsible for keeping his food safe. Didn't trust anyone, not even the guy making his tea. And still, some believe he was slowly poisoned toward the end of his life. Paranoia, violent outbursts, physical collapse. The symptoms matched. The autopsy, done centuries later, found high levels of mercury in his bones. Maybe medicine, maybe murder. Either way, too late for dessert. And the poisoners weren't always enemies. Sometimes they were family. King John of England, yes, the one from all those Robin Hood stories, was long suspected to have poisoned his own nephew Arthur, a political rival. The meal? Unclear. The motive? Very clear. And after that, English nobles didn't dine without their food first being blessed by someone else's stomach. Even in more recent centuries, the risk didn't vanish. Napoleon Bonaparte? Some believe he was slowly poisoned during his exile. Hair samples showed arsenic. Of course, he also lived in wallpaper full of toxic dyes, so it's hard to know whether his death came from enemies, decorators, or dinner. But my personal favourite? Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France. Small, powerful, always dressed like she was in mourning, which, to be fair, was appropriate for how many people she may have helped move on. She was obsessed with poisons, collected them, studied them. Some say she tested them on prisoners, served suspicious feasts where rivals mysteriously got stomach cramps, visions, or simply dropped face first into their pheasant. It's no wonder French kings adopted elaborate tasting rituals. Some even demanded priests bless the food, just in case spiritual protection could outpace chemical reaction. And that brings us to the point. These weren't isolated events. They were patterns. Every time someone powerful fell with a spoon in their hand and foam on their lips, it sent a message across kingdoms. This could happen to you. So kings started watching their kitchens, building walls around their dining halls, employing tasters, people like me, to be the first bite, the first risk, the first to fall if something went wrong. We were human shields with clean nails. Of course, not every poisoning made the books. Most didn't. Whispers, sudden illnesses, fevers with strange colours. Deaths blamed on bad shellfish when no ocean was within sight. In this line of work you start to realise history remembers the famous poisonings, the dramatic ones. But the rest? They vanish like a bitter taste after too much wine. Even now, in this castle, the rumours don't stop. Last winter, one of the guards fell sick after sampling a meat pie meant for a visiting diplomat. He survived, but only just. They blamed undercooked pork. I still don't buy it. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, listening to my own breath, wondering if that soup had a strange aftertaste, I think about the ones who didn't make it, the nameless tasters, the unlucky nobles, the kings who thought themselves untouchable. And I think, this job isn't just about taste, it's about trust, the most dangerous spice in any dish. So the next time you see a banquet scene in a painting, or a medieval movie with overflowing wine goblets and roasted swans, look a little closer. Someone in the shadows, just off frame, already tried that meal, and they're probably still waiting to see if they live. Some jobs you grow up dreaming about. Knight, blacksmith, even court jester. At least they got to make people laugh. No one dreams of being the royal food taster. It's not the kind of work you see sung about in taverns or written into legends. There's no ballad called "The Man Who Swallowed Just in Time." You don't get glory. You don't get a horse. What you get is a seat at the king's table and a higher-than-average chance of dying with stew on your chin. Let's start with the hours. They don't tell you this when you accept the position, which, for the record, isn't really accepting, more like nodding in silence while someone places a spoon in your hand. You eat when the king eats. If he gets hungry at dawn, You're there. Midnight cravings? You're summoned. 3 banquets in a single day? Hope your stomach's ready. And you don't just show up. You arrive early to observe the dishes, the cooks, the table settings, to watch for changes, for strange behaviors, for the quiet signs of something being off. The king dines in comfort. You stand. The king chooses what he eats. You don't. And if he skips a dish, you've still tasted it, for nothing. Just a quiet game of roulette with no reward. Now let's talk about pay. Some believe tasters are well compensated. I've heard that before. You must make good coin to risk your life daily. Sure, good coin is relative when the alternative is death. Truth is, I eat like a king and live like a kitchen boy. My quarters are small, cold in winter, and far from the royal wing, probably intentional. If I were to drop dead in my sleep, they wouldn't want the smell drifting into the halls. My clothes? Standard issue. My boots have holes. I sew my own cuffs. The king once gifted me a ring. Bronze, not gold. I wear it on days when I feel especially replaceable. And then there's the training, or the lack of it. There is no school for food tasters. No academy where you learn to detect arsenic or nightshade by scent alone. Most of what I know, I learned the hard way, through fear, instinct, and watching others not make it. There was a boy before me, Leonard, bright eyes, quick smile, fast with a knife. First day on the job, he chewed too fast. Didn't wait, didn't observe. Soup was fine, but the goose was off. He vomited for hours, lived somehow. Got reassigned to chamber pot duty after that. Never smiled the same again. What's worse than the food? The waiting. Because unlike a soldier in battle, you don't fight and fall and get it over with. You eat, then you wait. Minutes, sometimes hours, wondering if that warmth in your chest is digestion or doom, wondering if that slight sweat on your brow is just nerves. Or something darker at work. You learn to live in that half space. Not sick, not safe, not important, not invisible, alive, but only conditionally. And still, people think we have it easy, because we don't swing swords or clean stables, because we eat well. Let me tell you something. When every bite might be your last, flavor stops mattering. I've tasted roasted quail soaked in honey and garlic so rich it made my eyes water, and I've tasted it with dread. I've sipped wine older than most villages, watching for bitterness that wasn't from the grapes. I once tasted a pie so perfect I nearly cried, not from joy, but from the realization that I might never taste anything again. Luxury isn't luxury when it's laced with fear. Socially, we don't belong anywhere. Too close to the king to be accepted by the regular servants. Too common to be welcomed by the nobles. We hover in between, alone at feasts, silent during ceremonies. Always present, rarely spoken to. No one wants to befriend the man who might not make it through dessert. And the exit process? Simple. If you die, they find someone else. If you live too long, they start to wonder if you're too comfortable, too familiar, too trusted, too close. That's when the whispers start. That maybe you've built immunity to poison. That maybe you've grown too bold. That maybe you're the threat now. I've seen it happen. A taster dismissed quietly, given a bag of coins, told to leave the castle by sundown. No warning, no thanks. Sometimes they vanish on the road. Other times, their replacements show up the next morning with fresh boots and new spoons. So no, this isn't the kind of job anyone dreams of. It's a job you survive. Day by day, bite by bite. You learn not to hope for comfort. You learn to appreciate neutral flavors, soft bread, clear water. You learn to smile politely through nausea and nod at nobles who have no idea your hands are trembling behind your back. And at the end of each day, if you're lucky, you lie on your straw mat with an empty belly and a heartbeat still counting. That's our version of luxury. People talk, especially in castles, and eventually the talk reaches you, even if no one says it to your face. Some call me brave, others call me foolish. Some whisper that I must be proud. Imagine being that trusted, they say, to be that close to the king's table, to share his food, his space, his air. But they never ask the question that actually matters. Do I feel honored, or do I feel trapped? When I first got the job, I told myself it was an honor. I had to. What else could I say? That I was afraid every time I sat down? That my stomach twisted not from hunger but from dread? Number, I said, it was noble. I convinced myself I was protecting the crown, doing something important, maybe even heroic. I repeated the words others said to me. You're the king's shield. You're vital to the kingdom's safety. You serve with your life. And for a while, I believed it, until I realized what I had really become, a canary in the kitchen, a breathing, blinking test subject, not valued for who I was, but for what I could absorb without dying. That's the thing about so-called honor. It's often just a nicer word for control. They don't chain us to the wall. They don't shout or beat us, but they bind us all the same, with expectation, with loyalty, with the subtle weight of being useful but not valued. I've seen it on the faces of others, not just food tasters, but court scribes, handmaids, armor polishers, those who hover close to power but are never part of it. Their smiles are tight, their backs straight, their eyes tired. We all live in that same in-between space, too close to escape, too insignificant to notice. But what stings the most? It's when people treat you like you should be grateful for the risk. Better than working the fields, they say. At least you're not swinging a sword. At least you eat well. As if fine food makes up for the quiet terror of not knowing if today's gravy was your last. Let me tell you something. Fear, when it's daily, doesn't get smaller. It just gets quieter. It becomes part of the routine. You taste, you wait, you smile, you pretend. And deep down, a little voice says, maybe today. And a quieter one replies, it doesn't matter. You're not supposed to say no. I've known a few tasters who did see it as glory. They wore their position like a badge, spoke proudly of their role, called themselves chosen. But they also drank more than most, smoked whatever they could get, rarely slept through the night. Because pride is a good mask, but it doesn't change the job. Whether you call it service or sacrifice, it's still swallowing someone else's danger. And in the end, they all ended the same way. Some stepped down and faded. Some didn't get the chance. There's a particular kind of loneliness in this work. It's not just isolation. It's a disconnect from both sides. The nobility doesn't truly trust you. The servants don't quite know what to make of you. You're always near, but never with anyone. Even at meals, I eat alone. First, quickly, quietly, then I leave. Before the stories start. Before the wine flows. Sometimes, I linger in doorways just long enough to hear laughter and music. Not for envy, just to remember that other people do eat for pleasure, that there's still joy out there. Mine just comes with a different flavor. And yet, despite it all, there's something else too. A strange, unspoken pride. Not in the role, but in the survival. Because every day I do this. I walk a tightrope no one else sees. And I do it well. I study. I observe. I memorize every wrinkle in the cook's forehead, every change in routine, every new ingredient that finds its way into the sauce. I've learned things most people never will. Not from books, but from instinct. From fear honed into focus. And yes, maybe that is something to hold on to. Not the title, not the supposed honor, but the fact that I know exactly how fragile power is, and how easily it rests on the shoulders of someone no one notices. If you ask me whether I would choose this job again, I don't know what I'd say. Sometimes I think I would, just to prove I can. Other times, I dream of silence, of fields, of bread that tastes like nothing but bread, of food that doesn't come with meaning, of life that doesn't come with warning signs before every bite. So, is this honor? Maybe. Is it servitude? Definitely. But more than anything, it's a lesson that in royal halls, not all chains are made of iron, and not all heroes wear armor. Some of us wear aprons, and carry our courage in our stomachs. If I had a coin for every time someone asked, so, did every king actually have a food taster? I'd have enough to buy myself a small farm and finally eat in peace. The short answer? Not always. Not officially. And not everyone who tasted food died for it, or even knew they were doing it. Let me explain. The idea of a royal food taster is so dramatic, so poetic, so perfectly medieval, that it almost demands to exist. Writers love it. Painters love it. Playwrights? Obsessed. But history, real history, is far messier. In some courts, yes, there was a person assigned to sample the king's meal before it reached the table. Their entire role was known, recorded, even documented in royal budgets. Praegestators in Rome, Kupfersteckers in old Germanic regions, cupbearers in Persia. But in many other places, the line blurs. Sometimes it was the chef who tasted first, under the watchful eyes of guards. Sometimes it was the steward, whose job was to inspect and serve the food. Sometimes there was no tasting at all, only a prayer, a blessing, a hopeful glance upward, and sometimes they just pretended. See, the illusion of safety often mattered more than the safety itself. The king sees a servant nibble, a slice of ham, nod politely, and step aside. Did that servant really test every dish, every sauce? The wine? Probably not, but the king felt better, the nobles felt better, the guests relaxed, and the ceremony continued. That's the thing about fear. It feeds on absence, so people fill the gaps with ritual. Taste a little, sniff the wine, cross yourself, mention how sweet the carrots smell today. All theatre, but powerful theatre. Then there's the question no one wants to ask out loud. What if the food taster is in on it? That, I suspect, is why some kings skipped the practice entirely. Too many layers, too many hands in the kitchen, too much trust required. Better, they thought, to rotate the staff, keep everyone guessing, have dishes prepared in multiple locations, brought in sealed containers, change the menu last minute, hire cooks from different regions who don't speak the same language. I've heard of kings who never ate the same thing 2 days in a row. One ruler of Castile was said to eat only food prepared by monks in a hidden abbey, carted in under guard every morning. A sultan once demanded his meals be prepared by deaf mutes, believing silence guaranteed secrecy. These weren't tastings. They were systems, designed to confuse, distract, and prevent a single point of failure. And in those systems, the food taster became irrelevant. So yes, my job exists, but it hasn't always existed everywhere, and even where it did, it didn't always mean what people think it means. Sometimes the taster wasn't there to detect poison, but to absorb blame. If the king fell ill, someone had to be punished. If a guest died, someone had to be dismissed. And if the court was restless, well, a good public tasting reminded everyone who was in charge. We weren't shields, we were symbols. Of course, there were places where the danger was very real, where poisoning wasn't rare, it was expected. Italian courts in the Renaissance, for instance, were practically soaked in suspicion. Rivals everywhere, secret lovers, jealous cousins, sons with too much ambition. In those places, having a taster wasn't optional, it was survival. Same with some Eastern courts. In certain dynasties, it was considered normal to have 2 tasters, one for meat, one for drink. In a few cases, animals were used first. Dogs, chickens, even pigs fed scraps from the royal table before humans touched it. And yet, sometimes the animals survived, and the people didn't. Poison can be picky. There's also the matter of timing. Fast-acting poisons? Easy to catch. Slow ones? Not so much. A taster might survive the bite. The king might eat. And 3 days later, one of them dies in bed, quietly, their lips purple and stomach full of regrets. In that case, who gets blamed? No one. Just bad luck. So, back to the question. Was there always someone tasting the king's food? Number. But the idea of it, the story, was always there. Because the idea was powerful. It made the king feel safer. It made enemies think twice. It made loyalists feel important. And it made people like me essential. Even when I'm not at the table, even when the king skips the formal bite and just starts eating, everyone glances toward me. Just in case. Just to be sure. Because sometimes, in courts like this, the fear of poison is more dangerous than poison itself. Do I mind? Not really. I'd rather be part of the performance than left out entirely. Besides, if someone's going to die dramatically over a bowl of soup, better it be me than the man holding the realm together with his trembling spoon. Sometimes, after the last candle in the hall has been snuffed out, I sit alone by the kitchen hearth. No dishes to taste, no king to watch, no cooks pacing behind me with tight faces and trembling ladles. Just me. the crackle of old firewood, and the silence that only comes after surviving another day. That's when the question returns. Was it worth it? Not the food, not the fear, not the title no one writes down, but the life it gave me, or stole from me, one bite at a time. I've eaten thousands of meals, each one laced with the same possibility, that it might be my last. People think that gets easier. It doesn't. You don't grow numb, you grow quiet. Your body memorizes the pauses. Your fingers know how to hold a spoon just steady enough. Your face learns how to smile through nausea. But your heart still skips. Every time. I remember the pigeon pie. Not because it was poisoned, though it nearly was, but because it was the first time I realized the job wasn't just dangerous. It was lonely. That day, I'd tasted something off, a bitterness that didn't belong. I said nothing. The king was watching. I swallowed, waited. I survived. Later, the cook confessed. Someone had tampered with the spices. They never found who. No reward. No medal. Just a nod. And that night, I ate a crust of old bread in my corner and thought, so this is what it feels like to live, but not belong. Some nights, I wonder what would have happened if I'd said no that first day, if I'd stayed in the scullery, scrubbing pots, or asked to learn the garden trade, or slipped away during a storm and joined a merchant ship heading anywhere but here. Maybe I'd still be alive, maybe not, but I wouldn't have carried the taste of so many meals meant for another man, wouldn't have learned the weight of silence, wouldn't have felt the strange pride of being invisible, yet necessary. They say kings are chosen by blood, but me, I was chosen by hunger, by fear, by chance. I became the shadow between appetite and death, a body made useful by being expendable, not a knight, not a hero, just a man with a mouth and a quiet willingness to use it. And yet, through all of it, I've lived. Not just survived, but lived. Not in gold or comfort, but in lessons that only danger can teach. In knowing that trust is heavier than armor, that silence can be sharper than a blade, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is chew. So if you ever think about my life, don't picture a nobleman, don't imagine glory. Picture a man with tired eyes, holding a wooden spoon, watching the steam rise, and asking, one more time, what's for dinner? Because in the end, a bite can cost a life, or it can be one, and for now, at least, mine still continues. They say every empress is born into silk. I wasn't. I was born into sawdust, sweat, and the stale breath of drunk men shouting in the dark corners of Constantinople. My father trained bears for a living. My mother bargained for food with smiles that barely held. I grew up behind the curtains of a crumbling stage, where the air smelled of cheap wine and spilled ambition. You wouldn't have noticed me back then. I was just another girl in the background, barefoot, invisible, cleaning up after the crowd, the kind of girl history forgets, or worse, never even sees. But I saw everything. I saw how men spoke freely when they thought you were nobody. I saw how women disappeared if they spoke too loudly or asked for too much. I learned how to walk without making noise, how to smile without showing what I was really thinking, and I learned to listen. I danced before I knew what the dancing meant. I wore what they gave me, said what I was told, bowed when they laughed. Not because I loved it, but because girls like me didn't have the luxury of refusing. I didn't dream of being an empress. I didn't dream at all. Dreams were expensive, and I had nothing to spare. What I had were instincts, sharp, quiet things that told me how to stay alive. When to nod, when to run, when to wait, and when, finally, to speak. They thought I was nothing more than a distraction, a passing shadow on the walls of their empire. But shadows see everything. They remember, and sometimes, if they wait long enough, they learn how to step into the light. I never wore innocence well, but I wore resilience like armor. And one day, when the time came, I didn't flinch. This is not a fairy tale. There was no glass slipper, no noble prince with gentle eyes. Just me, my past, my hunger for more, and a world too rigid to see me coming. So if you're expecting the story of a woman born into greatness, look elsewhere. This is the story of how I became one. They called me Theodora, but only when they had to. Most of the time, I was that girl, the dancer, the cheap one, the body moving on stage while men drank and forgot the day. No one ever really looked at me, not for who I was, only for what I gave. A curve of the hip, a practiced laugh, a lie painted in colour and sweat. The stage wasn't glamour. It was wood splinters and worn sandals, bruises where no one would see. I danced because it was that or beg, and even begging had its own kind of performance. You learn quickly in a place like that how to catch coins with your skirt and insults with your silence. My earliest memory is of holding a tray taller than me, stumbling through the back rooms of a tavern. The floor sticky, the air thick with heat and smoke, men arguing about horses and taxes and wives they didn't love. Sometimes they'd pull me closer, ruffle my hair, ask my name, but never really care. I was part of the furniture, or less than that. When my father died, the animals we trained were taken, the stable closed. My mother, desperate, did what any woman with mouths to feed would do. She took us into the theatre. Not the theatre of art and poetry, but the kind that made men forget themselves in wine and women. That's where I learned to survive. By 12, I was mimicking the older girls, copying their steps, their posture, their smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. I wasn't the prettiest. I wasn't the most graceful. But I was watching. Always watching. They say girls like me are dangerous. They're right. Because when you grow up being treated like nothing, you learn exactly how much everything is worth. You learn to calculate the price of attention, the weight of silence, the power of timing. You learn that words mean little, unless you know when to whisper and when to roar. I wore cheap fabrics dyed in colours that bled onto my skin. My eyes were always lined too dark, not because I wanted to be beautiful, but because I wanted to be unreadable. If they couldn't see what I felt, they couldn't take it from me. I wasn't ashamed. Not of dancing, not of the men. The shame belonged to them, the ones who paid to pretend they held power while needing someone like me to feel it. By 13, I was already in the deeper parts of the taverns, brought out when the richer clients came. I was told to laugh at their jokes, pour their wine, and if they touched too long, smile like I didn't notice. But I noticed everything. The way they looked at my face and not my eyes. The way they spoke of politics and women as if both were things to own. The way they forgot my name the moment I turned away. I never forgot theirs. Some nights I'd sneak behind the curtains and listen to them talk. Powerful men, senators, advisors, priests, arguing over war, gold, law. That's how I learned. About the empire. About how things moved behind the silk screens. No books, no tutors, just observation and memory sharpened by hunger. I became a shadow in their world. Present, unnoticed, but learning all the time. My sisters followed similar paths. One married early, the other left for the provinces. I stayed. Not because I loved it, but because something in me knew I wasn't done yet. Every time I danced, I imagined something else. Not love, not romance, but a room where I spoke, and they listened. A place where I didn't have to laugh to be heard. It didn't come easily. I was spat on in the streets. Mothers pulled their sons away from me. Even other performers, born into slightly better stations, looked at me with disdain. But I carried myself like I had something they couldn't see, because I did. I had rage. I had memory. I had a spine built not of bone, but of years bending and not breaking. And then, when the first man tried to take more than I offered, when he pushed and demanded and laughed, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I bit him, hard enough to bleed. They punished me, of course. I was made to kneel on salt-covered floors, scrub the back rooms for a week, but something shifted after that. They looked at me differently. Like maybe I wasn't just a girl they could push around. Like maybe I had teeth. I began to speak less, smile less. Not because I was broken, but because I had started building something. No one knew yet, not even me, that this was the foundation, that every humiliation, every coin thrown at my feet, every whisper behind my back was a stone in the structure I was creating, not a palace. Not yet, but a staircase, and I was climbing. They say when a woman disappears, she's either dead or starting over. I didn't die, but for a while, I had to let the old version of me vanish. The girl from the theatre, the dancer from the taverns, the shadow that learned how to move without being seen. I left her behind in Constantinople. I was 17 when I left the city. No parade. No plan. Just a borrowed cloak, and the weight of every memory I couldn't carry anymore. I had followed a man. Yes, it was foolish. I thought he loved me, or at least needed me. He didn't. He left me stranded in North Africa, with no money, no name, and no way back. And that was the best thing he ever did for me. I remember my first night alone in Alexandria. The city glowed differently from Constantinople. Less marble, more dust. Less gold, more truth. I slept behind a bakery, shivering under the scent of warm bread I couldn't afford. No one knew who I was there, which meant no one expected anything. That, in its own quiet way, was freedom. I took whatever work I could find. Sewing, cleaning, delivering baskets. I scrubbed floors in houses where the walls didn't whisper about me. I stitched fabrics for women who didn't raise eyebrows at my silence. And for the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I was surviving. But surviving is never enough, not for someone who remembers too much. So I began to ask questions. Why do they say God punishes women more than men? Why does a man's mistake make him bold, and a woman's make her dirty? Why does power always wear a beard and a robe? The women I met in exile weren't queens. They were mothers, widows, artisans. One had lost her husband in war, another her child to hunger. They taught me more than any tutor ever could. They taught me that dignity wasn't about status, but about choice. That strength was not always loud, and that silence, when chosen, could be more powerful than any scream. I found work in a small community of wool dyers. My fingers were stained purple and blue for months. I began to write again, simple thoughts, copied prayers, letters I never sent. It was through these notes that I began to reclaim a voice I didn't even know I had lost. It was in Alexandria that I encountered a group of Christian women who followed a more radical, ascetic path. Some called them heretics, others saints. I just called them honest. They spoke about justice, about charity, about the soul being more important than the body. It was the first time religion didn't feel like punishment, but like a question worth asking. I didn't become a saint, but I started to think deeply, and thinking, in a world that prefers obedient women, is already a kind of rebellion. For over 3 years, I wandered, from Alexandria to Antioch, then to Syria. Each city brought new lessons, new scars, and new reasons not to go back to who I was. I listened to priests debate philosophy in the streets. I watched men barter ideas the way others bartered spices. I saw emperors spoken of like gods, and gods spoken of like enemies. I didn't speak much, but my mind was never quiet. I saw a woman flogged for speaking out against a corrupt governor. I saw another arrested for stealing bread to feed her brother. And I thought to myself, if men ruled this world through law and sword, maybe I could learn to rule with something sharper: memory, observation, and patience. By the time I returned to Constantinople, I was no longer a girl. I didn't need the stage. I didn't need the makeup or the coins or the fake laughter. I needed purpose. I wore a plain shawl. I moved slowly. People still stared, but not for the same reasons. Some remembered me, the dancer, the mouthy girl who didn't know her place. But others, they sensed something different. I had changed shape. I wasn't beautiful anymore in the way they wanted, but I was something harder to define, and therefore harder to dismiss. I started working again, but this time for myself. I wove my own fabrics, sold my own embroidery. I spoke with merchants, questioned laws. I made sure I was seen where I chose to be, and invisible when I needed to watch. And then came the day I saw him, Justinian. He wasn't emperor yet, not even fully prince. Just a man in fine robes, surrounded by men who laughed too loud. But he didn't laugh. He listened. And when our eyes met, it wasn't desire I saw. It was recognition. He saw something in me that hadn't yet surfaced. A storm that hadn't arrived. A woman who had burned and returned from her own ashes, unapologetic. But that part of the story comes later. This chapter was about losing everything and discovering that I was still whole, about being thrown away and realizing that the world had not seen the last of me. They thought exile would break me. It did. But like any tool well used, the breaking was only to make me sharper, and sharper I became. I didn't fall in love like they do in plays. There were no violins, no dramatic pauses, no grand monologues about fate or forever. I met Justinian on an ordinary afternoon, dressed in wool I had woven myself, selling thread in a corner of Constantinople I had once danced past in shame. I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for space, to be useful, to be left alone, to begin again. And yet, there he was, not with a crown or a golden chariot, just a man in deep purple robes, standing still while everyone else moved. He didn't stare. He studied. Not the curves of my body, but the shape of my silence. And I knew from the moment our eyes met, this wasn't someone I could charm. This was someone I could challenge. His name, of course, preceded him. Justinian, nephew of the Emperor Justin. A man whispered to be brilliant, ruthless, tireless. Not quite noble by birth, but noble by vision. He wasn't the kind of man who bought flowers. He bought futures. And somehow, inexplicably, he saw one in me. I had been studied before, admired, desired, possessed, but never respected. Never asked questions by a man who actually waited for the answer. Our conversations began as tests. He wanted to know if I had read the scriptures. I had, in multiple interpretations. He asked my thoughts on the role of law in an empire. I gave him my answer, and then another, contradicting the first, to see if he could follow both. He could. We debated charity, vengeance, power, love, and in every topic, he didn't look for my approval. He looked for my truth. That's when I knew this wasn't a romance. This was a negotiation. He didn't try to save me. He didn't see me as broken or needing redemption. He saw me as a weapon without a hilt. Beautiful, yes, but dangerous to carry unless you understood how to hold it. People talked, of course. A former actress? A tavern girl? The church frowned. The court scoffed. There were laws, after all. Ancient rules that said men of his rank could not marry women of my past. But Justinian, he didn't follow rules. He rewrote them. Literally. He lobbied to have the law changed. Not hidden, not twisted. Changed. And when the emperor, his uncle, approved the revision, it wasn't just for love. It was for legacy. When we married, there were no fireworks, no parade. But I walked into that union with nothing to prove and everything to become. People assumed I'd be ornamental, a shadow behind the throne, a trophy polished to hide the dust of my past. They were wrong. From the very beginning, I sat beside him, not behind. I read the same briefings, heard the same advisors, challenged the same policies. And when they tried to shut me out, I reminded them, softly, and only once, that I wasn't there because I was born to be. I was there because I had earned it, inch by bloody inch. Justinian never treated me like I was fragile. He knew better. When he rose to power in 527, officially crowned emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, I became more than a wife. I became co-ruler. In every way that mattered. People thought love softened me. Number love gave me permission to be sharp, and someone strong enough to hold me when I was. Was it easy? Of course not. We argued. Endlessly. I accused him of listening too much to cowards in robes. He told me I underestimated patience. I threw books. He threw silence. And still, we held each other. Because it wasn't sweetness that bound us. It was belief. He believed in my mind, my fire, my past, not as shame, but as material. I believed in his vision, even when it frightened me. They say power corrupts, but in our case, power revealed. It peeled away everything false, until all that was left was purpose. And ours was terrifying. Together, we began to shape a different kind of empire, one with laws that spoke to women as citizens, not property. One where the stage I had once danced on could no longer be used to traffic despair. One where charity wasn't performance but structure. I never wanted to be a queen. I wanted to be heard. And with him I was. History has always struggled with love stories like ours. We don't fit the mold. We didn't meet in purity. We weren't gentle, but we were real. And in a world carved by masks, a real love, unapologetic and unfiltered, is perhaps the most revolutionary thing of all. They thought I would disappear into silk, that once I was married, I would sit beside the throne like a statue, decorated, silent, grateful. They were wrong. I didn't marry an emperor to be ornamental. I married a mind that could keep pace with mine. And when Justinian became emperor in the year 527, I did not lower my gaze. I raised my voice. There was no crown heavy enough to silence me. The palace was a labyrinth, marble and mosaic, guards and whispers. But I had known more dangerous corridors. I had walked barefoot through rooms full of drunk men and bad intentions. Nothing about gilded walls intimidated me. What did intimidate me, though, was power unused. Justinian, for all his brilliance, was still a man born into a system designed by and for men. He wanted change, yes, but his vision needed fuel, and I had plenty of that. I began by listening, really listening, to the servants, the laundry women, the scribes, to the midwives and market vendors. I listened to the people no one asked for opinion but who carried the weight of empire on their backs. Their stories were quiet, but I had been trained by silence. I knew how to translate it into action. I didn't demand a seat in the Senate. I didn't need it. I had the emperor's ear and eventually the emperor's respect. He began to consult me not just in private, but in policy. I sat in on council meetings, sometimes silent, sometimes not. There were bishops who refused to address me directly. Men who muttered under breath when I entered the room. I let them mutter. They stopped, eventually. Because while they debated theology and taxes, I was writing something different. Protection for women abandoned by their husbands, funds for shelters to house girls who had been forced into prostitution, legal aid for the poor who could not read the laws that ruled them. I didn't want praise. I wanted consequences. I had once lived in the part of the city where consequences only visited the weak. Now, I wielded them, and I chose to point them upward. One of my proudest moments was changing how justice treated women. Before me, a raped woman had to prove she fought back hard enough. After me, the law recognized her word. That change didn't undo the world's cruelty, but it told women, I see you, and that was something no law had ever done before. Some men called me dangerous. That was fair. I was. But not because I hated them. I simply refused to disappear behind them. Even in religion, I carved space. Justinian followed the orthodox doctrine, but I leaned toward monophysitism, a heresy to some, but to me, a quiet rebellion of spirit. I supported monks and exiles. Others wanted erased. Not because I needed a theological win, but because I understood what it meant to believe something the powerful wanted you to renounce. When I wasn't writing or reading reports, I was visiting the people. I went to the weavers' districts, to the bakeries, to the churches without gold. I never announced myself. But I didn't hide, either. I saw in their eyes what they saw in mine. Survival. And then came the fire. The Nika Revolt, they called it. The city burned. The mobs screamed for Justinian's head. Senators and generals begged us to flee the palace. There were ships waiting in the harbour. All we had to do was run. He looked at me shaken, and I told him what no empress was ever supposed to say. If flight is the only choice, I do not choose it. Purple makes a fine burial shroud. He stayed. We stayed. And together, we crushed the revolt. Not with cruelty, but with resolve. We rebuilt the city from ash. We rebuilt the empire from fear. After that, no one questioned whether I ruled. They knew. They still whispered, of course. About my past. About my sharp tongue. About the fact that I didn't bear children. How could an empress without heirs be complete? But I had already given birth to something larger. A presence. A voice. A shape in history that no lineage could define or erase. I didn't need a son to carry on my name. My laws carried it. My legacy wore no crown, but it walked the streets in sandals and bruises, in the hands of women who could now hold their heads higher. There were nights I sat alone in the garden, the moonlight pooling over marble like spilled milk. I would remember the smell of wine-stained floorboards, the sting of salt on scraped knees. I would remember who I had been and how far she had come. They say power changes you, but for me it clarified. It stripped away performance. It revealed who I had always been beneath the soot and silk, a girl who had learned to survive in silence, now speaking for thousands who could not. I didn't just become empress, I became dangerous. To the men who had grown fat on silence, to the laws that never knew a woman's name, to the empire that assumed it could use me without ever fearing me. They learned. It began with a chariot race. Funny, isn't it? That an empire as old as Rome could be shaken by something as ordinary as sport. But nothing is ever just a game when men are angry, and power is brittle. They called it the Nika Revolt, but to me, it was the night the empire caught fire, and I had to decide whether to burn with it or make it through the flames. The Hippodrome, that great arena of dust and spectacle, had long been more than just a place for racing. It was where the people roared, where they cheered their factions, the blues and the greens, not just for victory on the track, but for the ideals they projected onto them. It was entertainment, yes, but it was also politics, pressure, and pent-up rage. By the year 532, that rage was boiling. Justinian's tax reforms had angered the nobles. His justice reforms had upset the old legal circles. His rise, our rise, was resented by those who still thought birth was destiny. And then, 2 men were scheduled for execution. One blue, one green. Public enemies, yes. But the people saw something else. Injustice, favoritism, cruelty. The crowds, usually divided, chanted one word together, Nika. Conquer. And just like that, the city turned. It happened faster than anyone expected. By nightfall, fires were lit across Constantinople. By morning, whole quarters were ash. The palace shook with screams outside the walls. The Senate turned against us. Generals hesitated. Ministers begged us to leave. Justinian paced like a man trapped in a nightmare. I watched him, not as an empress, but as a woman who had learned that fear left unchecked becomes surrender. He turned to me, eyes hollow. "There's a ship ready," he said. "Say the word, Theodora, and we leave tonight. We return when it's safe." Safe, as if safety had ever been part of my life. I stood, quietly. My hands did not shake. I had already lived through worse than fire. And then I said the words history would carve into stone. Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. I will not flee. Purple makes a fine burial shroud. The room froze. Some thought I was mad. But Justinian looked at me, really looked, and I could see the fear draining from his face. Not because he no longer feared death, but because he remembered who we were. He stayed. We stayed. The generals regrouped. Belisarius and Mundus, our finest commanders, drew up a plan. On the 6th day of the revolt, while the rioters packed into the Hippodrome, chanting, screaming, demanding a new emperor, we struck. Soldiers entered through hidden gates. Blades met bodies. It was brutal. Over 30,000 people died that day. I still see their faces sometimes in my sleep. No one wins a revolt without losing something first. For me, it was the last of my illusions about power. That day, I stopped being a survivor and became a ruler. The city smoldered for weeks. Ash floated like snow, but we rebuilt. And not just with bricks. We rebuilt with order, with law that no longer bent to the highest bidder, with foundations that carried not just the names of men, but the voices of people who had been ignored for centuries. I oversaw the construction of hospitals and orphanages. I consulted with architects rebuilding entire districts. I insisted on wider streets, fewer places for mobs to hide, but also more light, more space, more breath. It was during this time that Justinian and I began construction on Hagia Sophia. He wanted a monument. I wanted a cathedral that made people feel both small and seen. Stone and light rising into heaven, not to glorify rulers, but to remind the ruled that beauty could exist even after blood. When it was finished, we stood inside together, beneath that vast dome. And for a moment, we were silent. Not because we were proud, but because we knew what it had cost. They say I saved the empire that week, but I don't think I saved anything. I simply reminded it what it was meant to be. Empires are not marble and gold. They are the people who refuse to run when it burns. And I didn't run. Even now, when I walk past the Hippodrome ruins, I can still hear them. 30,000 voices, some angry, some afraid, some simply swept into a tide, too big to escape. I remember them, not as enemies, but as part of the price. Power is not inherited. It is survived. And I had survived, again, not because I was braver, but because I had nowhere left to go but forward. I never studied law in a marble hall. I didn't grow up reading scrolls beside polished tutors. My classroom was the gutter. My teachers were drunk men, sick girls, bruises, silence, and the weight of coins tossed without names. That's where I learned justice. Before I ever sat near a throne, I had been judged in alleyways, with eyes, with hands, with assumptions that stuck to me like soot. So when they handed me power, real power, not just the influence of pillow talk or court gossip, but the power to write, to argue, to shape the world in ink and parchment, I knew exactly what to do with it. I remembered the girl who was told her body was a commodity. I remembered the girl who had no place to go when she said no, and someone laughed. I remembered the girl who wanted to scream but was told her voice would cost her bread, and I wrote laws for her, not as a symbol, not for show, but because I was her. My first fight was over shelters. No woman should have to return to the man who beat her just because she had nowhere else to go. I demanded the empire establish houses where such women could find food, care, and protection, without being treated like criminals or burdens. They called it radical. They said it would encourage rebellion. I called it human. And then came the brothels. They were everywhere in the city. Most were controlled by men who took most of the money and none of the risk. The women were dispensable. If they became sick, pregnant, or simply too old, they were thrown into the street like wilted flowers. I'd known that life. I knew the tricks, the lies, the smiles forced through pain. So I pushed for a decree. No woman could be forced into prostitution, not by her family, her debt, or her master. Any man found doing so would face public punishment, not whispered shame, but recorded, branded, undeniable consequence. It wasn't enough to rescue. I wanted to rewrite the script. A woman was not a commodity. A wife was not property. A daughter was not bargaining currency. And so we reformed marriage laws. Women could now own property, inherit wealth, initiate divorce if they were abused or abandoned. They could retain custody of their children, even without a man to speak on their behalf. They told me it would undermine the family. I told them, a family built on fear is already broken. Even in the court system, women's voices had been discounted. Their testimony in court was considered half that of a man. I argued, if a woman can bear a kingdom's children and manage a household, then she can speak on her own behalf before a judge. Some judges laughed. I replaced them. The resistance came not only from men. There were women too, well-dressed and well-fed, who said I was unwomanly, that I made life harder for respectable women by defending the broken ones. But I had no use for respectability if it came at the cost of justice. I didn't write these laws alone. I sat with scribes, with advocates, with poor women brought in from the streets to tell their truths in the palace. I listened. I asked. I cross-examined the systems that held them down. I tore apart the myths dressed as morality. I did not flinch. And yes, Justinian listened. He didn't always agree. We fought over language, over enforcement, over reach, but he let me in the room. And that's where change begins. Not in speeches, but in doorways that stay open. Every time I signed a decree or helped draft a clause, I imagined the faces of the women who would never know my name, but would feel the change in their lifetimes. The girl allowed to leave a marriage without shame, the widow who could keep her home, the child who saw her mother stand taller in court. That was legacy. Not stone, not gold, not titles, but dignity made real. And still, it wasn't perfect. There were laws I couldn't pass, walls I couldn't break. There were girls still being sold, still being silenced. Even as empress, I couldn't save them all, but I had cracked the structure. And once something is cracked, it's only a matter of time before light gets in. Sometimes, late at night, I would walk alone through the quieter parts of the palace, candle in hand. I'd pause at the edge of the stone corridors and remember the girl I had been, barefoot, hungry, unseen, and I'd whisper, not for the gods but for myself, you didn't dream in vain. Let them say what they will, that I was a scandal, that I rose too far, that I loved power too much. They don't scare me, because I've seen what the law looks like when it serves only the strong. I've lived it, and I'd rather be cursed for trying to change it than praised for letting it stand. The end came slowly, not suddenly, not with a gasp or a fall or a flash of light. but with a quiet erosion of strength, of time, of the body that had carried too much, too long. They told me it was illness. They whispered it like it was a curse, a punishment. But I didn't see it that way. What they called decay, I called clarity. I had spent my whole life climbing, out of dirt, out of shame, into fire, and beyond fear. When the pain began in my lower belly, I didn't flinch. I had known worse. This was simply another storm. One I would ride out like all the others. At first, I ignored it. That's what we do, isn't it? Strong women. We let the pain build, thinking if we just keep going, it will go away. It didn't. Eventually, the physicians said the word no one wanted to say aloud, cancer. Though in those days they called it something else, something vague and helpless. But I wasn't helpless, not even then. I kept working. My hands still signed decrees. My voice still echoed in the council chambers. My name still carried weight, not because of the crown on my head, but because I had built something no illness could undo. And yet, there were nights I could not move. The pain would press down like stone. And in those moments, when the palace fell silent, and no one was watching, I would lie awake, eyes open, and think not of death, but of unfinished work. There were still laws to pass, still women to protect, still wrongs that needed naming. Justinian begged me to rest, but I couldn't. How do you rest when the world is still spinning wrong? He would come to my bedside, hands shaking slightly. He had always been the thinker between us. But in those last years, I saw fear in his eyes. Real, human fear. Not of war, or policy, or revolt, but of losing me. I never said the things he wanted to hear. I never promised I'd get better. Instead, I gave him instructions. If I die first, I said, don't let them soften me. Don't let them turn me into a saint or a cautionary tale. Let me be sharp, even in death. Because I had not lived gently, I would not die that way. There's a silence that comes in the final stretch of life. Not emptiness, not sadness, but acceptance. I began to speak less in court. Not because I was weaker, but because I had already said what needed to be said. My words had become buildings, policies, protections. I didn't need to repeat them. I only needed to make sure they lasted. The servants began lighting candles for me before I even asked. Priests came more often. They spoke of peace, of heaven, of forgiveness, and I nodded politely. But my heaven had already been lived. It was in the faces of the women who could now walk freely through streets where once they had been bought and sold. In the eyes of the girls who knew the law was no longer written against them, but with them in mind. I had been told for so long that I was unworthy, that my past would swallow me, that my voice was too loud, my history too shameful, my reach too bold. And yet, there I was, dying not in disgrace, but in full light. In a palace I had once only imagined, in a city that now carried my fingerprints across its stones. When the pain grew worse, I stopped seeing guests. Not out of pride, but because I wanted to be remembered standing. Still, Justinian stayed. Every day, sometimes in silence, sometimes reading aloud, and sometimes just holding my hand, not as emperor and empress, but as the two children we had once been, broken in different ways, healed beside each other. In those last days, I found myself thinking often of my mother, her tired hands, her silence. I never got to tell her that I understood her now, not just as a daughter, but as a woman trying to survive a world that expected her to stay small. I thought of the stage, the laughter, the jeers, the weight of coins on skin. I wondered how many of those men would recognize the girl they once tried to buy, now shaping the laws they had to obey. I thought of the girls in the shelters, the wives who walked out and didn't come back, the daughters no longer married off like livestock. They would never know me. Not truly, but I knew them, and that was enough. On my final day, the city was quiet. The court hushed. The bells did not ring. I asked for a window to be opened. I wanted to hear the sounds of Constantinople, its life, its chaos, its stubborn beauty. I wanted to hear the empire breathing, because in a way, I had become part of its breath. I died without fear, not because I believed in heaven, but because I had already built something that would outlive me. They tried to give me a funeral fit for saints. But I had already written my epitaph in the streets, not with marble, but with memory. They thought I would fade, that when my body was gone, so too would the memory of me. That the title of Empress would be returned to the vault of men's names, polished and rewritten, my presence reduced to a footnote. But I knew better, because I hadn't built statues. I had built consequences, and they are harder to tear down. They tried to turn me into a myth, of course. Easier that way. Easier to praise a dead woman than to face the discomfort of what she changed. They called me clever, graceful, tragic. They forgot to call me dangerous. But history, real history, lives not in titles, but in what comes after. I had once been a girl with no name, no rights, no future. And yet I had sat beside the ruler of an empire and dared to write the rules. And not just write them, live them. I didn't come to power clean or quiet. I arrived scarred, loud, unapologetically real. And I stayed that way until the end. My laws outlived me. They became bones in the body of Byzantium. Some were changed, yes, others erased. But many remained, buried deep in how people treated one another, how women were seen, how justice was measured, and even where they were broken, they left cracks. Cracks that future women would wedge their hands into and pull wider. I became a mirror, for the poor girl who dared to want more, for the tired wife who no longer feared walking away, for the girl on the street who knew her worth wasn't set by what she wore. They wouldn't say my name in public, not always, but in private, behind thick curtains and in whispered circles, they told my story, not as a fairy tale, but as a warning, as a possibility. Because I had done what no one expected, I had made power bleed, not with swords, but with words, and law, and presence. I had proven that a woman born in the dirt could speak language sacred enough to bind men, that a dancer could become a ruler, that survival could become policy, and that memory, true memory, is not gentle. It is sharp and alive. Let them remember me however they choose. But know this, I did not rewrite history to be remembered. I rewrote it so you could live it differently.